Welcome to the Radical Abundance Podcast, where we celebrate God's radical abundance in all things. For the entire month of October, we are talking about God's radical abundance of purpose in our life. Today's guest is Army Chaplain Major Lisa Northway, and we're going to talk about what happens when our purpose doesn't go the way we think it should be going. While you're here, don't make this a one-way conversation. Go ahead and leave a comment, hit like and subscribe, and feel free to share this episode. Welcome to Radical Abundance. I'm your host, Teresa Janzen, and today I have a special guest with me. I have U.S. Army Chaplain Lisa Northway, who is a family life chaplain, currently the only woman serving in active duty as a family life chaplain in the U.S. Army. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Teresa.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're here. We're really excited about this new podcast. And the whole month of October, we are talking about God's abundance of purpose in our life. And before we get to that, though, tell me about what is it like to be a family life chaplain? What is a typical day in the life of a family life chaplain?
That surely it is a loaded question. I did want to preface by saying I'm just excited to be with you here today, Teresa. It's been fun getting to know you and what you bring to our world and your world, and looking forward to learning more as we go along. And I did want to clarify, we actually do have two other trained family life chaplains. They are dear chaplain sisters of mine and good friends, and they've gone on to some more amazing assignments as they've been continue to be trusted by God and country. And so your question, what is a day in the life? And I can honestly say there's no cookie cutter way that my day looks. I just got back from a few days leave, and I had my calendar out. It looked pretty comfortable. And then I saw just minute by minute, there was the scheduled already, but then there's the spontaneous needs that come up. And I saw that white space filling up quite quickly. My days are full, but they are also rewarding. I do call my job the best, hardest job in the U.S. Army. I will unapologetically make a recruiting effort in this conversation that it is so obvious to me. It continues to be obvious that God loves military families as he always has, and he cares for them. And so he continues to call others to show up in this place and to be able to minister, whether they're a civilian or in the military or thinking about it. I have a counseling center here at Fort Hood, and we have the scheduled ones. And sometimes people are also looking, maybe it's a commander, maybe it's a spouse or a situation that needs a discreet conversation away from the command. Somebody that has something quite tender. There could be even something where someone may be in legal trouble and they're trying to protect that and make room for the miracle of healing and bringing wholeness, whether it's to a marriage, to a family. We are sometimes first responders, sometimes we're second or third responders. Sometimes I get to partner with other organizational chaplains who come in and with all humility say, Chaplain, this is outside of my scope or my expertise. Can you help my soldier? Can you help my family? And that is what I do. And we join forces and we figure out what's the best way, what are the best courses of action to help the soldier or their family.
So Chaplain Lisa, it sounds like not only like a traditional chaplain is there at times of need and maybe crisis, maybe painful moments, and maybe some joyous moments, but specifically a family life chaplain, though, you are right in the heart of the family at times of transition and need and things like that. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes. So the things that feel broke or fall apart in any other family also happens to families in the military. They have that additional burden that they are at any point can be called away. And in recent weeks, we have seen many of our soldiers literally get on a plane and go to another country and make that ultimate sacrifice. In addition, we have some that are just leading, not, I don't want to say just, but doing that sacrifice, no notice, and going to another place where we have refugee camps now. And, a few weeks ago, we couldn't have even imagined what that would look like. I don't know that we've seen anything quite like this since World War II. And that was different because internment camps we had were really for some of our own. And in the state we're in, and the lack of trust with our Japanese Americans and our German Americans, and which is a sad thing, that we have that history. And I certainly hope we continue to learn from our hard mistakes. And now we have this amazing ability to host people who were looking at possibly no future, or a future that they couldn't fathom themselves, because they have lived for the last 20 years in a certain amount of freedoms, especially for women and children, that they had not had before. So we have generations of refugees who've landed in our country in different places around the world. Many other of our allies are doing their part to make room and to figure out the way ahead for others, and learning how to be sensitive to that. We have different situations that we've never seen before. I was just hearing a story from a leader, family member, saying, my husband's trying to grasp with the fact that he's got 12-year-olds that they smoke cigarettes, and they're trying to figure out, how do we accommodate? How much do we accommodate? These are just different cultural things, and trying to be sensitive and not be able to reserve judgment. We all have a bias of what's healthy, what's not. We've also had the privilege of a lot of health education other countries haven't had. So it's really important to reserve judgment and figure out, how do we be sensitive to a very intergenerational population.
Now we're talking about purpose all this month and God's abundance. Of course, I love God's abundance. I love God. I love to talk about God's extravagance, because that's how I see our God and how much he wants to bless us. And this issue of purpose, I think, is really central to people's lives and finding fulfillment in their work and their family and in their life. What does purpose look like to you, or what do you really appreciate about God's abundant purpose?
Sometimes, I think more often than not, it's really hard to grasp what God has already provided, what he's already done. We know we may have had the privilege, the luxury of growing up in church or not, but having a sense and being told what that is. But until you experience it, until you are in a place where you have to depend on God's provision and see that he doesn't intend for his children to just get by, but he's got something bigger and better. My life verse is Proverbs 16 and verse 9. A person, a man or a woman, makes their plans in their heart, but God directs their steps. And we are a people, I think God gave us this word so we wouldn't have to be unduly distracted by what we see in front of our face, that we would learn to be able to trust his word, trust him more than what we see on a legal document, on a medical document, any other thing that appears to have the say in our lives. And in that context, be reminded for the Christian that Jesus Christ is still the Alpha and the Omega. Only he gets that first and last word over our lives, our careers, our families, our healing, our outcome, and ultimately our redemption, this side of eternity and the next. Sometimes what we think, where we think we're being cut short or we're being left out, is actually God's segue into showing us what he's already done. His word says, I have works that I've prepared ahead of time for you. And so with something that looks like a heartache, not getting promoted when you thought you would be, and thinking, well, am I at the end of the road? And then God flipping it. God is the ultimate flipper of our homes and our hearts and our minds, and say, no, I'm going to use this. I'm going to put you right back in the sweet spot of your ministry where your heart really is for those great works I've prepared for you. And I am living that life when it looked like it would be devastation and there was heartache. And I see how I'm getting another opportunity to discover, not just for myself, but I come alongside my job, my role as a family life chaplain specifically is to be in that room, be in that space or wherever I'm called into to find out, to be a curious student of what God is already doing in somebody's lives and to learn with them and support them in that process. And even if they are not a God follower, God believer, to make room for the miracle of that, even that they might see that that they have a situation that it needs a miraculous outcome. It's probably not going to change unless there's a miracle that started in the heart and the mind first. And yet that is not beyond God.
I love the idea of those hard moments being God's segue. That really resonates with me because I've had a number of those segues in my life. And I also love the title of God being the ultimate flipper of situations, and
Yes.
that is totally true. So often when we're in the midst of something, it's very hard for us to see where it's headed. And we may not even have the ability to see where it's headed. I can see where having an external voice like a chaplain can be helpful sometimes to gain some perspective. And even then, sometimes, though, it's not very evident to anyone where this is going to go. And yet we can trust that God is faithful and that God has a plan for our life. The verse that I really like for this podcast and the idea of radical abundance is John 10:10, when Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. And I think there are so many people who are experiencing life of a sort, but it's more along the lines of getting by or existing or just trying to do the next thing. And they're not experiencing that abundance and beginning with that abundance of purpose. Do you see that in your world too?
I do. I think very often, sometimes people by their own choices and whatever shame from their family of origin or shame in the workplace of maybe they don't think they've lived up to someone else's ideals or maybe even their own. They're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to have an underwhelming life. I'm living the less than desirable place. These were not my goals. And sometimes we all have that human tendency to sometimes get stuck there. But to be able to spiritually lift someone's head and heart up and see, we have a campaign entitled Reach One. And sometimes that can make it seem less overwhelming because we know, everyone in our culture understands our challenges and it feels like, how can we make that impact? But I think that Reach One is something very tangible, a place to start. Who's going to show up in my world today? Where am I going to be asked to show up in someone else's space? And if they don't have a sense of God's provision, then it's hard to grasp the concept of abundance. But when you see that and you can find out where have they've come to, where are they right now in their sense of what matters to them, their meaning of life, what was it that they were holding on to that feels like a deal breaker for them, of whether they can go on or not. We have a lot of veterans, active duty, and those who have retired right now who are wondering, was it worth it all? Mm-hmm. And we only get our time. We have this short window that we get to do what we're called upon to do by God and country. And I think when we show up and even when we don't know the answers to all the questions and we don't know in God's economy, in world history, how it's all going to pan out, but I think it's about if we can have these conversations in safe places to reduce the shame so that we can come to that place and know that we can choose to trust God. We don't know all the answers, and it's okay not to have all the answers. There's not a lot of templates necessarily for what we're doing today. Sometimes we think we're better, we're better than other cultures because, we've we have all this expertise, and we find out in our humanness, we realize that is the exact place, in that place of grief and loss and not knowing, where God can speak in and again flip it so that we see that we can be better off because of his provision.
The amazing thing about God's provision in my mind is that oftentimes he uses other human beings as the instrument of that provision. And it's such an honor and a privilege, and encouragement and a testimony that God can provide in my life, when he also uses me to be that source of provision in someone else's life. And he's created us as a people in fellowship, better together, each one reach one, and so much stronger when we are together as a body of Christ, and also even as a body of human beings. Because like you said, not everyone is necessarily walking with the Lord or knowing about this opportunity in the relationship with God. And yet we are part of each other's circle, and part of the provision and part of the invitation that God extends to people.
Yes. And I do think that we've talked before, where we can welcome, even reluctantly, all of the God-given emotions. We certainly would rather stay in a place of joy and those feel-good stuff, but if we can make room for grief, that the hard things that inevitably will come. You can't escape this life without some sort of grief. If you can figure out a way, and I think that's the learning curve, the spiritual learning curve for all of us, is where are those places where they can coexist together? Where can we make room for God to do something that we cannot provide for ourselves? And I think that's the law, the spiritual law of abundance, is that God is doing it. We're opening our hearts and minds for him to do something he already wants to do for us.
It's so amazing and so exciting. Absolutely. Chaplain Lisa, sometimes I think that people really get stuck in a achievement mentality, and they measure their purpose, measure their worth, and measure their value based on the achievements that they have in life, that promotion, that next award, that raise, whatever it is. To me, that can almost suck the abundance out of the joy of those types of things. But what has been your experience in walking alongside people, especially when purpose may not look the way that they thought that it should look?
Well, there's a couple of things. I certainly can speak from personal experience in the last couple of years. I had actually been passed over for promotion, and there was administrative error that is still in process that brought about this situation. And very often when this comes about, some people who do what I do, or as leaders, say, okay, so it's just time to pack it in. And I'm like, no, I don't sense that God's changed his mind. I'm going to be here. I'm going to still show up, because I believe that God still has a place for me. It certainly has he has a place for all of us that he's called to ministry. If we choose to continue, whether it's in the military or not, whether it's in the corporate world or not, whether it's in your communities and your churches, but to continue to give God that room to figure out how he's going to turn it around, how he's going to make it work. And so, because quite honestly, if I had not been passed over, I could not have expected to be in that place, that sweet spot of ministry that I'm in right now, because it is reserved for the most part for someone of my current rank. And it is an amazing thing. We have a lot of hurting places in our military, and of course, right here where I am right now, we are looking forward. We're leaning forward. There are a lot of people who seem to be strategically placed or retained, and we're having for such a time as this, both women and men coming together to bring healing, to leverage what God is doing in and through, and even in spite of us, And so it's an exciting time for that. But just, I spent a lot of time in mentoring conversations with peers, with junior officers, other chaplains. And just recently, I had another chaplain call me, and just the grief of hearing that an award that really was meaningful to them had been downgraded. And sometimes even if your commander or even your brigade commander approve it, other people approve it, sometimes it can, at a certain level, it can be downgraded, and it doesn't seem like that person's getting the honor that was due them, that hard work. And not that we do that, especially as chaplains versus other officers, we do it for that recognition, but those are the things also that show up that allow us to continue. There is a certain competition, really, when we have our promotion boards, and they line up all our files together. And if your paperwork, your board file isn't as good as what that current board thinks, then you may not get promoted. And that's a hard place. And so it's easy for me, if I'm given permission, to go ask the hard questions. And it's so interesting to me because I gotten that call and that heartache. And I remember praying with that person, and I was able to have a conversation, found out the person who had put it in was not even aware. And so I said, sir, let me know what I can do. If there's anything I can say, I think there might be something that we're not all completely aware of. And I know you believed in your chaplain. You believed that in all the great work that the person who took care of the spiritual readiness for your organization. And I couldn't have orchestrated that better. My hope is that there'll be something good and something wholesome. But I also know, in addition, is that God's got each one of us, regardless of our situations. And we do need each other. We do need to continue to pray together, encourage each other, because sometimes what we see right in front of us, the phone call that chaplain got saying, hey, that award may not be all you thought it was going to be, and having to deal with that, because you can't go back necessarily and insist on it.
But as much as we would like to say that everything we do is very done for very noble reasons, and it's all about the ministry or doing the right thing. And for me, I am very human, and I have to admit that I really enjoy affirmation. I like someone telling me, hey, you did a good job. And yeah, sometimes that could be in the form of a promotion or something, not in the role I currently serve in. We don't do that type of thing as missionaries, but I love it when someone says that I did a good job, because then I know I've done a good job. I like having feedback. So there's my confession. If that makes me shallow, I don't know.
Not at all. Mark Twain, I think you know the quote by Mark Twain. He says, I can live for 6 months off of one compliment. And it doesn't mean that we're shallow. It just, in fact, I think that the fact that Mark Twain said that his words of affirmation was probably not his love language, but he still recognized, I do have a need.
Yeah, one of my love languages I do know is words of affirmation. And as much as I wish it were something more, holy or something, I just know that it is. So I do appreciate being told when I've done a good job. And it would drive me absolutely insane if a clerical error prevented me from having that affirmation. And yet I do know that there's some real character building that can come as a result of that. There's real refocusing that can come as a result of that, and humility also. Those are all really important lessons that we all have to experience. They're not nearly as fun, though, as experiencing other types of lessons.
Teresa, I can honestly say I would not have chosen the particular path of the chaos. I also believe that the creator of our universe, our Heavenly Father, is still creating order out of chaos.
That's true. This is not a perfect world. It's a fallen world, and we are dealing with imperfect people just as we ourselves are imperfect. But one thing I do like to remember, though, just like I like affirmation, is that other people like affirmation too. And so it's good to give someone an attaboy, attagirl every once in a while.
The idea of freely you have received, freely give really fits in with that theme of abundance we're talking about. If we have been gifted with any sort of abundance, and our abundance will look different than someone else's. That's why it's so important not to compare or contrast in that unlovely way. But if we've had that gift of abundance, whether it's joy, whether a sense of purpose, which looks different in different stages of life, then we're eager to give it. We want to show up and say, hey, this is unjust. This is tough. You and I together, our team, our family, we are actually called to an imperfect system. It's part of the calling. And if we could change that, I'm sure we would. But this is here we are, and we are presented with this opportunity. And as Christians, as God followers, also, the world is watching. Some of us are going through more public situations that we would not have chosen. And so it's an opportunity as people wonder, well, goodness, if I was passed over, how would I deal with that? We get a choice. We get a choice to show up. We get a choice to dig deep, as we say in the military community, and continue forward, believing that we can walk out as Christians with all the Jesus confidence that's already been abundantly provided.
Yeah. And remembering that we have been blessed for the purpose of being a blessing to other people, and not only retaining that blessing for ourselves. And like you said, we have a choice in how we respond when we're in those circumstances that are opportunities. I think that's the word you used. I think that's a very nice way of saying that we have something to learn here. And we may not respond perfectly. And so I like to hope that when someone else does not respond perfectly in a situation, that I can show them the same measure of grace that I hope that other people will show me when my humanness also shows. And if we could just give some more of that grace around a little bit, I think it would be really helpful in understanding that people don't always respond in a perfect way to an imperfect situation.
I don't claim to myself. I do see that every time I hear of someone's response, or what appears to be a lack of appropriate response to different situations, including my own, I think, what is God requiring of me here? Especially if I believe that God is actually requiring something better than what they're offering to the situation. How will I be the difference? And can I refrain from vilifying somebody who I think has done something unprofessional, broken courtesy, or even a military regulation? How do I get after that? How do I continue to make room for the miracle that I'm hoping and praying for?
And then how do we allow someone the opportunity to respond differently in the future, and not just always remembering, well, last time they blew that whole situation way out of proportion, but allow people to learn and grow just as we learn and grow along the way.
Exactly, because I know we serve a God who continues to give us chances, continues to give us opportunities. And I think when I think about how much I've been given the chance to live my dream and to continue to live it, that's what I think we may have talked about this before. In my situation, even though I was passed over, I was given an opportunity to sign on the dotted line to live and serve beyond even the regular time of service. And I literally, in my spirit, when I read it, because I saw the date was past the time when most people are allowed to serve. Again, there's no guarantees because it's kind of considered, they look at that down the line, but I was asked, just go ahead, would you sign to serve longer than you might have anticipated? And it was with a wholehearted yes. I love what I do. I feel privileged I get to. I know there's not a lot of men or women my age getting to do this what we call sometimes a young person's road. But we just get to be there every day and just show up and do our part.
Yeah, I think really embracing the opportunity that presents itself today. And that's what finding one's purpose is about. Because if we base all of our ideas of purpose on what we think we should be doing at the time we think we should be doing it, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. But when we take those opportunities that come, when we take whatever is placed in front of us today as being our purpose for that moment in time, the person who is standing before us, the situation that is standing before us, the opportunity that God brings before us, then we can wake up every morning, like you were just describing, to do something that we absolutely love, even when we don't know for sure what it's going to be as the day begins to unfold.
Exactly. My day, at the end of the day, getting back to your original question, looks very different than what it looked like on paper at the beginning of the day. All of that filled up in some pretty amazing and glorious ways that I could not have drummed up on my own, which again shows God's goodness. I just get to be the person for now. We're all invited to that, our own, for such a time as this.
Absolutely. And I do know, just to put it out there, you and I do both have kind of extreme situations where, our days can look very different and very intense at any given moment. What would you say to someone maybe who has really a kind of a different scenario in their life? Maybe their day seems a bit more predictable, and that schedule on the calendar is pretty much what the schedule is going to look like. What encouragement could you give to them to maybe allow room for some new opportunities that could present itself?
That's a big question, but I would say that to give God some of that, some space, give God the time so he can give to you what he already has planned for the work that he's already planned for you to do. And that, I think that's key to living a regret-free life. There's nothing wrong with having our plans. God says it, in the verse in Proverbs 69, that's part of our human experience. Is we need to make plans. We need to go about our world, but be willing to have this spiritual flexibility or spiritual adaptability. And even when it might seem mundane, that you're just doing the same thing it appears you did the other day, but making room to see what God will do in and through your particular situation. Again, I think part of being able to show up in places that look like they're the same thing on the outward, but to show up differently, being in touch with what's going on here. And what are you spiritually hungry for? Are you hungry? And if you're not feeling that, if you're not sensing it in your spirit, then God, make me hungry, make me thirst all over again for some righteousness, for some good stuff, for something of substance, but not something I can provide, something that you want to provide for my situation, for me, for my family, my loved ones, my comrades, my neighbors, my community.
I think the really great opportunity in every day is that unpredictable human element. And when we can open ourselves to the other people around us, then I think we can really open the opportunity for that, for God to show up and to bring us something new and maybe exciting, maybe challenging. But I think that's where the purpose comes in, is when we can really speak into each other's lives and have an impact. So I would join you in a prayer for people who are really looking for an opportunity to expand their purpose in an exciting and meaningful way. And maybe people who are listening can put a note in the comments as to something that they would really like to pray about, that God would just open the door, because God is faithful to invite us to join him in his work when we make ourselves available and ready to him. And so I am excited to see where the journey takes the people who are listening to this, and how they find purpose and excitement in their life in bringing God's kingdom building activities to this world. So Chaplain Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today, and just thank you for your service. Many years serving in the U.S. Army as in various roles, but currently as a family life chaplain. Thank you so much for caring for the men and women in our armed forces.
Thank you, Teresa. It is my wholehearted privilege and pleasure to do so. Thanks for having me today.